we are launching the talks about understanding traceability in textiles and fashion. For that, I have invited Jesse Dolstra from RemoKey as a speaker, who will introduce this topic later on. Just as a brief introduction, who Ariadne Innovation is. Ariadne Innovation is a startup company focusing on sustainable textiles and fashion. And for that, we created Ellie, our digital companion, who is the ambassador for sustainable textiles and really believes in the strength of cooperation to drive the sustainable change in the textile and the fashion industry. Ellie has her own network or ecosystem, Ellie.Connect. It's a digital platform that brings players from textile and fashion industry together to inspire, inform, share knowledge, and work together on new sustainable projects. We have a second tool, the Ellie Boutique, which is really a physical product booth, which aims at really showing and bringing, inspiring the sustainable textiles towards the ecosystem, the consumer, or the professional community in a modular and interactive way. We have created Ellie Talks because we believe not only in inspiring and connecting, but also, informing you about the new trends on, sustainability in the textiles industry based on textiles, or, the link to technology and the importance that technology and digitalization play in our industry. Just to give an example, we had some talks about the importance of recycling, mechanical recycling, with production company Altix in Germany. Our last Ellie Talks Tech was about how to use virtual technology in the textile and fashion industry, mainly also for marketing and sales purposes. And just, to briefly show you what is on the agenda, on the 7th of July, we will talk about the RETEX project, pan-European project concerning the recycling technologies as well, with Centex Bell, and again an Ellie Talks Tech, which will be in August, with startup founder Rosanne van der Meer, who will talk about 3D knitting technology with her business New Industrial Order. So we hope we can continue to inspire you. We're only a small group today, but I'm certain that we will be able to provide you with some new insights. Just to give you again the link to the website and the ecosystem where you can find much more information about our partners, what we're doing, and the projects that we're offering. And I would also like to point out that this Friday we also have a group demo about the platform at 30, for which you can still register. So I welcome you today. I just wanted to mention two practicalities. I hope you're okay. The session is being recorded to be able to use it on the platform later on. And I would also suggest we have some time for a Q&A foreseen at the end of the session. Maybe it's best if you have questions during the talk to just put them in the chat, and then we can answer them afterwards, after the session. So very happy now to introduce you to Jesse Dolstra of RemoKey, who will present you about traceability in the textile and fashion industry.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for the introduction. First of all, welcome everyone. My name is Jesse Dolstra. I'm a sales representative at RemoKey, and we're a service provider on the fields of calculation, credibility, and communication, specifically for recycled textiles. And I'll tell you a bit more about RemoKey, but first I want to take you briefly through the agenda of today. So we're going to talk about traceability, of course, the subject of today's meeting. I see there's one person wanting to join us, so let's definitely allow those. Aurélie, hello, welcome Aurélie, just in time for the presentation. I think that's great. So let me get back where I left. So we're going to talk about traceability, then we're going to of course talk about RemoKey, and in the end we're going to have a Q&A and discussion, which I hope will be very interactive. So first of all, traceability. We're going to talk about what is the concept of traceability. We're going to talk about why traceability is so important. How does traceability work in the supply chain? And I'm going to conclude it very briefly for you. But first of all, maybe a quick question. What comes into your mind when you think about traceability, and also in the field of, let's have a little interactive session with each other. Perhaps if you can go to this website, www.menti.com, and you can fill in this specific code. I would just briefly want to ask you to just share some keywords with us today. What do you think about when you think about traceability? So let's try out if that's working. It's the first time I'm using Mentimeter, so please allow me some things to try out. So let's see if people can find the website and then fill in the code. Look, it's the first things popping in: transparency, openness. That's a good start. We have 5 entries, I think, so don't be afraid to share anything which comes into your mind. Openness, transparency, sustainability. Blockchain, another interesting one. Complex, definitely. I'm going to talk more about this. Traggers, certification, recycled. Interesting. Look, there's more popping up. Tracers, another interesting one we're definitely gonna touch. The origin. It's pretty interesting how this is gonna be displayed. I really like this. Complex. To whom it belongs to, definitely interesting also. It's okay. I think we have quite some entries which are interesting. Greenwashing, very hot topic, I would say. Definitely lately, we have a lot of communications which are labeled as greenwashing. Interoperability, also a very interesting word, I think. I think we have a nice collection of words, and I think it's definitely interesting. When you think about traceability, there are definitely words which come along. But let's just continue and also then touch base on the differences between traceability, transparency, chain of custody, and tracers, because these are words which are coming along a lot of times in the industry. But perhaps it's good to have some clarity on the definitions. So first of all, traceability. Traceability is basically the ability to trace the history, application, or location of a product while tracking it along the supply chain, and hopefully also during the recycling process. And traceability provides assurance around the facts. Transparency is the ability to share and disclose all relevant traceability data with the stakeholders. And stakeholders, of course, can be consumers, suppliers, employees, or investors. A chain of custody, very much often linked to traceability and sustainability as well, of course. And that's the ability to trace the change and legal ownership of the product as it moves along the supply chain. And so you can really clearly track what are those legal movements and transactions of the product. And then final, physical markers, but I think better known as tracers. I just saw it as well. Somebody thought about tracers when you think about traceability. Words very similar, of course, and that's the ability to physically verify the presence of a fiber in a textile product at any stage of the supply chain. And how you can do this, I'll show you in a bit. But those are the differentiations. So why it is so important to talk about traceability today, and I think it's really important that we talk about this. And I'm also very happy that you're here today with me, so we can talk about it. And why is it important? I have a very small video I want to share with you, and I think it really clearly compiles what makes traceability so important and why we should all know more about it. So let's take a quick 1 minute 45. think it was an interesting and people only care when they know. So I think this is something which doesn't need much more explanation. I mean, the fact that we don't know who made our clothes, where it's coming from, is really confusing us into knowing what product is really sustainable and what is not. So I think that was an interesting point as well to let you know why it is important. But maybe, which is also interesting, is the fact that the fashion and textile industry is one of the world's most important global industries, with a staggering value of 2.4 trillion. And it's 2.4 with a lot of zeros. And however, many of the sources of information about the industry are fragmented, incomplete, and unreliable. And I think that really sums it up. Why is traceability so important? If we then take a look at the top 100 brands in the world, and we take a look at the sustainability goals they've set, for example, 2025, they want to have 100% sustainable fibers, using 100% sustainable fibers, and the market for sustainable fibers is expected to triple. What we then see, the reality is that 95% of the fashion industry has no visibility across their supply chain tiers. So there's a huge gap in traceability and visibility, especially. And a little side note, they're saying 100% sustainable fibers, and under sustainable fibers, for example, you could also say, well, BCI cotton, is that a sustainable fiber? It's not completely watertight, I would say, if that's a sustainable fiber, but that's there's room for discussion, and it's an initiative. So I think that that's a little side note. Then we can clearly see how that translates in the priorities of apparel sourcing officers, basically, the purchasers of supply chains, of companies. And what you can see here is that, of course, sustainable materials is on number 1, but number 2 very clearly is transparency and traceability. So how does this traceability work across the supply chain? And I think that's equally as important, because how do you create transparency as well, or traceability? So I had a quick small picture of how to illustrate, or how to basically show you what is everybody's dream about traceability. Everything is very linear, it's very clear from source to retailer, nothing new under the sun or nothing special. But the reality is this. It's completely dispersed, it's fragmented, everything is going all over the place, and they're very long supply chains, very often switching and changing. So there's a very high level of dynamics in the supply chains. And what you at the end get is a product which ends up in a store, of which is very difficult to trace its origin and source. So how can we implement traceability and create more transparency? Because this is what we all want, I believe. One option is, of course, the certification. If we look at the global recycled standard, this is something we use with RemoKey as well. And this is a global standard for setting requirements for third-party validation of the recycled content. And this takes into account the chain of custody, social aspects, environmental aspects, and also the chemical practices. That is all secure, and all protocols are being followed when claiming a recycled fiber. And products should contain at least 20% of recycled content when carrying this certification. Another form is the QR codes and RFID chips. There's a difference in technology. QR codes are, well, as you can see, an image based on an automatic generation, which then directs you to a website or a different page. And this is also what we use for RemoKey in this specific case, in a project with the European Spinning Group, and where we communicate the savings of our products and also the GRS certifications through the QR code. RFID chips are a bit different. Those are really physical chips which are connected to sensors, but are also somewhat vulnerable as well to copying. And it's the same with QR codes, but at the same time, it's a very big step forward already if we look at the traditional supply chains and the traditional level of transparency and traceability, I think, in textiles. Interesting development, I think. We also saw it earlier as well. Tracers, physical markers. You could basically say that's an invisible signature in the garment, mostly consisting of a nanofiber, a marking fiber, or also called it's the name, the marking fiber. But also it could be part of the textile finish, so in a coating, or it could be also processed in the sewing thread as part of the polymer in the case of polyester, for example. Blockchain, I think also I saw 1 or 2 times even. And I also just want to show you a very interesting little video about a company called Textile Genesis, which is using blockchain as well to incorporate traceability. So let's take a quick look at this one. Oh. So blockchain basically is you could consider it as a digital vault, right? So you create a digital copy of a physical product which you store in the digital vault, which is named the blockchain. And this is, of course, a very interesting development, what we're seeing. And if you really want to create a solid chain of custody, specifically administrative documents, this is definitely going to be a part of the future of traceability. Why is traceability still not widely adapted by the textile industry? Well, I think it also showed in the image before, two different supply chains, one very linear, very clear, and the other one going all over the place. It's simply complicated. It's a complicated topic. It's very fragmented. The supply chains are long, especially in time. And as said before, they're ever changing. So you can imagine that a lot of brands, they make use of different supply chains. And if you really want to create traceability, you also have to create consistency in those processes, which is difficult. But most of the things as well is the low demand from consumers and governments. I mean, simply, I think the last couple of years, and especially the last year, I think a lot of consumers and also governments have taken a proactive stance on really creating standards for traceability and also for transparency, simply because of the huge impact the industry is having, but also the lack of transparency which is present in the sector. But good news is this is increasing. We're seeing, of course, new laws being developed. In my country, the Netherlands, for example, we know that there's been working on material passports, but also the Authority Consumer and Markets have wrote a letter a couple of weeks ago stating that all the sustainability claims of textile companies will be researched. So you can imagine that greenwashing will basically be forbidden, which is fantastic news, of course. And if you ask me, that can't be implemented soon enough. And the third part is it requires time, commitment, and investment. Sometimes I can hear people say, well, if I have to implement a traceability system or I have to make things transparent, it's going to cost me time and money, and I have to invest. And of course, and those are arguments from a business point of view. But I think it would cost you a lot more, especially resources and money, if you don't act now and if you don't make those investments in creating traceability through your supply chain, starting from this moment. And to conclude, I thought this was a nice summarization of this topic of traceability, that sustainability is not possible without transparency, and transparency is not possible without traceability. So you could say that traceability is basically the first step in creating sustainability. Then we move to RemoKey. RemoKey is a service provider in the textile industry, and we help brands to understand and create transparency, credibility, and effective forms of communicating the environmental savings of recycled textiles to end consumers. And our service consists out of 3 pillars: calculation, credibility, and communication, as I mentioned before. And here you could see a little overview flow of how we work. We start with the recycled fiber, which is turned into a yarn, which is woven into fabric, finished, and a product. And of course, you want to communicate and be transparent about the traceable steps in this process. And of course, the environmental savings. So what we do first is we map the supply chain. We take a look at the supply chain of a specific product, and we have to know before we start calculating what is the exact composition of this product. So very much specifically look at the exact level of recycled content. And for this, we have a RemoKey information system, which basically tracks the information. We request this information from the supply chain partners of our brands, of our customers. Most of the time, they are brands. So from their supply chain, we're going to ask information, and on this information, we create calculations, or we make calculations. It's always done on an LCA approach, life cycle analysis. And the savings we always communicate through 3 components: water, CO2, and energy savings. And as you can see here as well, this specific environmental savings, 1 per kilogram of fabric saves 649 liters of water, 60.4 kilograms CO2, and 110.4 kilowatt hours of energy. So that's the first step. But of course, that calculation needs credibility as well, because we see a lot of claims being made by brands, but how is this credible? And that's equally important as, I think, the calculation. So as mentioned before, we really map the supply chain, and we create transparency. And through this, we create data validation and data collection. And then we have an independent third-party company assessment with a partner for sustainability, which basically follows and tracks all the protocols which should be there taken by the supply chain partners, and to discover if anything is wrong, yes or no. And this also creates a very clear overview of the supply chain. Are these partners credible? Are there fair pay being conducted? And most important for us, of course, the GRS or RCS certifications, because those are an independent verification of the authenticity of the recycled fibers. So we have a calculation, we have making sure this is credible, but then of course you want to communicate this. So you want to communicate the full journey of your product, the full traceability of your product. And we share this through a landing page. This is a digital product landing page, which I'm going to show you a bit later after this, where you can share the sustainable performance of your products. And this is connected with a QR code. And the QR code is, of course, put in the hang tag or the label of the product. And we always customize every web page, because you can imagine every product is unique and has a story. So we're always looking to see, okay, how can we create the most unique landing page for this specific product? And this is an example of one of our customers called Valra, a Dutch company in homeware in the Netherlands, which has a really nice collection with remade cotton. And this is how we communicate with them on their label. So this product contains 70% recycled content, which saves this amount of liters of water, 1.19 kilograms of CO2. I'm mixing the two up, and 4.77 kilowatt hours of energy. And of course the QR code. And if you would scan this QR code, it would bring you on the landing page of Valra and the remade cotton collection. So what can you do now? I think this is a very practical point of view, because of course we're talking about traceability, but I think it's also good to look at a practical perspective. So the easiest, I think, step would be to create insights into your supply chain and production processes, so you can ensure credibility for yourself, but definitely also look at how third parties, for example, could help you improve that transparency and that credibility. And definitely, I think this is a very interesting point, a very important point, that look at transparency as an opportunity. What I sometimes hear is that, yeah, we're very cautious about sharing certain information with our clients or with our customers, because we feel that we have to protect our supply chain. And of course, from a business point of view, I can understand it to some extent, but at the same time, as mentioned before, I believe that the market will definitely move towards a system where transparency will be the standard, and that should also create and ensure that the social structures are being put in place properly, that raw materials are the raw materials they say they are and not fake or counterfeited, and that it's really an opportunity to embrace in that sense. So we're already almost at the end, and this may be an interesting question I want to ask you. Have you learned something new about traceability today? And again, you can go to the website and fill in this code, and you can skip from 1 to 10. You can give yes or no, and it's just for me interesting to see what you learn. And of course, in the Q&A, I hope we can have this discussion as well, to also learn or to hear your stories and your questions. So 8.5, that's really great. Let's assume that everybody hopefully learned something today. Somebody didn't, that's also good or not good, depends. But we can of course discuss in the Q&A specific things. Okay, well, that's very good. I would say 8.7. I'll accept that. So the Q&A, and I think now it's a good time to share your stories as well, or to share your questions. Feel free to ask anything. I think we're with a small group, so it's really, I think, interesting, and we have the opportunity to really take this time to share our stories with each other and to see how we can help each other on the subject of traceability. So thank you for your time, and let's start the Q&A.